Geez, Mom, don't you understand that you're embarrassing me? Get out of my room, yelled Christopher, throwing the headphones on the keyboard. Karen blushed in frustration. She wanted to object to the child, maybe even scold him, but froze, unable to find the strength to argue. Instead, she did exactly what her son told her to do. She left the room and closed the door. Another conflict between them arose out of nothing. She knocked on the door, but her son did not hear her. So the woman walked into his room, getting caught on a webcam. It turned out that he was chatting with a girl at the time, and the 12-year-old boy had no plans to introduce the girl to his mother, especially when she brought him a pile of washed laundry with Spider-Man and told him loudly about it. But is that reason for quarreling? After all, Karen did everything for him, did everything she could to try to keep their life as normal as possible. She got a second job to pay for the rent, buy clothes, and pay for Christopher's classes. She cooked his favorite food, tried to be involved in his life to help him in any way she could, but he still was not happy. Karen realized that she lacked the grit to raise her son. Bill was a real man and raised his son properly, always keeping him under control. But at the same time, he had a very close relationship with his son, showing that he loved him and was proud of him. Bill often said that the sooner you start treating your son like a man, the sooner he will become a real man. Christopher grew up brave, smart, and fair. He didn't let anyone hurt himself or his friends. The boy was very social, and from an early age, he made up adventures for himself and his peers. So there was never enough Band-Aids or antiseptic. But Christopher had never been angry, closed off, testy, or annoyed with the whole world. He had never allowed himself to yell at his mother before. Anyway, Christopher had never been a problem teenager. His personality changed recently, but unexpectedly, and very quickly. Exactly 1 year ago. Unfortunately, there were other reasons besides puberty. Karen, saddened by the quarrel, walked to the bedroom. She wanted to change after work and get to her household chores, but she had no energy. Karen Howard had been feeling quite tired lately. Her body ached, a look of sadness settled on her face, and her head was buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. She sat on the bed with a heavy sigh, looking at the framed picture out of habit. There were Karen, her husband, and Christopher, who had just turned 5. They were happy. "Will I be able to handle everything without you, Bill?" She shook her head as she looked at the family picture. Bill Howard died a year ago in a terrible car accident. He was driving home from a business trip, but was in too much of a hurry and was speeding. The car crashed into a pole. The car and the driver burned to nothing but embers. What was left of Bill's body was buried in a closed coffin. They didn't even get a chance to say goodbye properly. They only cried over the coffin lid. Their life had completely changed since then. Christopher withdrew into himself. The teenager did not want to share anything with his mother. When he felt bad, he just stayed in his room and put on headphones. And if Karen tried to talk to him, he always reacted with anger to any questions. And today, he was arguing with his mother again. Karen decided to call her only friend, Mindy, and share her thoughts. After all, she had no money for a psychologist, and her friend's help was free. Mindy had recently realized her dream. She bought a summer house in the countryside. She spent all her free time there decorating the house and planting flowers in the garden. So during the last few months, they rarely met and usually only called each other. "If I can't help him, probably I am a bad mother," the woman sighed heavily as she shared her feelings with her friend. "Mindy, I've tried to talk to him, but he withdraws into himself and won't share anything with me. Are you kidding? You're a great mother. You're very nice and gentle and kind. Maybe even too much, Mindy muttered. But this is who I am. I think it's wrong to push children too hard, especially Christopher. I mean, he's a good boy, but our life turned upside down. So the only way to solve problems is to talk to him. But how can I talk to him when he's always sitting in front of his computer with his headphones on? Should I cut the wires or something? Karen asked. You know what, Karen? Why don't you visit me this weekend? There is no internet, but very fresh air, and the river's 10 minutes away from the house. We'll have a barbecue and try to get Christopher to talk. The weather should be fine. We'll swim and sunbathe by the river, her friend suggested enthusiastically. The woman liked the idea. Maybe they really need a change from the city to the countryside. For a while. After all, living in the apartment they shared with her dead husband was stressful. Time did not heal. She still went to bed and, out of habit, turned to her husband's side to say goodnight and ask him to make the lights less bright. Bill liked to read books every night. One of those detectives was still on the bedside table. The bookmark was on the penultimate chapter. Bill never finished the book and had no chance to unravel the tangle of mysteries the author had woven. And Karen couldn't put the book away, so she wiped the dust off the bedside table and put the book back. I'll talk to Christopher and tell him about your idea, Karen promised her friend. In the evening, Christopher came out of his room and showed up in the kitchen where Karen was cooking dinner. Do you need some help? He asked, without looking at his mother. The woman hid a smile as she mixed potatoes and meat in the pan. She knew that was Christopher's way of telling her, I'm sorry. Yeah, help me to eat it. I can't eat it all by myself, she joked. With pleasure. It smells so good, Mom, her son smiled. Get the plates and forks out, please, and let's eat, Karen told her son. When it was time for dessert, Karen decided to discuss their weekend plans with her son. Mindy called. She took a vacation and went to the country for a week. The woman began from afar, with her eyes down in a bowl of vanilla ice cream. Cool, replied Christopher, eating his portion with gusto. She's inviting us over for the weekend, Karen said, looking intently at her son. And what am I going to do there, Mom? It's boring there, the teenager immediately protested. There's a river there. You can swim, sunbathe, and do some fishing. We'll have a barbecue, the mother persuaded the stubborn son. Please, Christopher, let's go together. Something seemed to break inside the boy from his mother's tone, and even his shoulders dropped. He stopped eating the ice cream and then looked at his mother. And in his green eyes, the same as his late father's, Karen saw her son. She saw the same Christopher he had been a year ago. Okay, Mom, let's go, he nodded. The weekend did welcome them with bright sunshine and cloudless skies. They were met by a happy Mindy who waited at the gate and waved to her guests. She kissed Christopher on both cheeks, though he desperately resisted and blushed. The same fate befell Karen. Come on, I'll show you my house and yard, she said cheerfully. Karen was enjoying their little trip. It seemed that all her worries and troubles were left in the city. And here she watched as her friend watered her giggling son with a hose, and he promised her cruel revenge. Despite her doubts, Christopher was having a great time too. Mindy managed to find common ground with him, as if she were a teenager herself. Karen was even a little jealous. Mom, can I go for a walk? Take a look around? Go to the river? Asked Christopher as he changed into dry clothes. Okay, just don't go too far, asked Karen. After all, this area was unfamiliar. You can't get lost here, waved Mindy. While Christopher is at the river, let's chat. The women lounged in the gazebo, sipping cold wine and eating strawberries. But before they had time to talk, Christopher rushed through the gate, running to his mother. "Mom!" he shouted, frightened. Karen immediately jumped to her feet. Her glass fell on the table, spilling the wine. But the woman didn't even notice. Her son's appearance indicated that at least he was being chased by a pack of wild dogs. The boy was pale and worried, trembling as if he had a fever, and his eyes were wide with horror. Christopher, are you okay? What happened?" Karen ran toward him, clutching her son by the shoulders. Mom, there, he tried to say in shock as if he couldn't put words together in a sentence. The boy took a deep breath and finally said, "There's Daddy." "What?" Karen and Mindy asked together. "Daddy," the boy repeated, still trembling. "He's on the next street. Walked into the house with the red roof, Mom. It's him. I saw him. He's alive." Karen's heart squeezed with love and compassion for her son, and she pulled Christopher closer, hugging him tightly. The mother began stroking the boy's head and back, comforting him. "Darling, it's only in your head. You miss him, so you imagined it. Probably that man looks a lot like Daddy," the woman said. "No, Mom, I swear it's Dad," Christopher said indignantly, freeing himself from his mother's embrace. "Look, let Christopher and I stay here while you go and see who's there," Mindy suggested. Needless to say, Karen didn't believe she would see her spouse. But seeing the son's condition, she agreed. She left Christopher with her friend and walked to where he had told her to go. When she found the house with the red roof, she stood on tiptoe and timidly peeked behind the gate. There was a man in the yard chopping wood and stacking it in a woodpile. When Karen saw his face, she turned pale. "Bill, it's definitely him," the woman muttered quietly. Noticing Karen, the man looked at her. Their eyes met. But then he continued chopping wood as if nothing had happened. Karen was so shocked that she couldn't say a word. She couldn't even call out to the man. Frightened, she went back to Mindy and immediately asked her who lived there. But Mindy couldn't answer anything. "Karen, I bought this house not long ago and I've only met a few of the neighbors. I know the neighbors from the house across the street and the houses on the side. If you want, let's go and ask them about everything. Maybe they can tell us something," her friend suggested. Together, they immediately went to one of the neighbors, Mrs. Murphy. She welcomed the guests and listened to their questions. Then she nodded. "Oh, you're talking about Michael. He moved into Mrs. Stevenson's house recently. Everyone knows about him. Nothing interesting ever happens here, but recently an unbelievable thing happened. A man was found in the woods," she said. "What do you mean, found in the woods?" pale Karen asked her. "No one tried to find him, so the poor guy settled in our village. Mrs. Stevenson is a widow. She has lived alone for a long time, so she sheltered him. She felt sorry for him. He looked a lot like her late son, so she started calling him Michael, like her son. I told her not to call him by the dead man's name, but still she decided to call him by her late son's name, and that man doesn't care. He doesn't remember his name anyway," the old lady replied calmly, adjusting the robe. "We have to go to that house," Karen said in a voice ringing with tension. "What if it's—" She couldn't finish her thought out loud. Also, she didn't want to give hope to herself and her son, but she wanted to believe in a miracle. Confused, Karen, Mindy, and Christopher headed to Mrs. Stevenson's house. Intrigued by what was going on, Mrs. Murphy decided to go with them. "Polly!" the old lady shouted. "Polly, Michael, you have visitors!" The host came out to meet the strange guests. The man, a spitting image of Bill, except with a beard, looked at them bewildered. He looked at Mindy's tanned face, turned his gaze to Karen's, and frowned. And then Christopher couldn't hold back the emotions that seemed to have been boiling up inside him the entire year. He ran toward the man. "Daddy! Daddy!" the child shouted. "Christopher, wait!" It was all that Karen had time to say. But the boy already had his arms around the man, snuggling up to him. He was crying, not embarrassed by the tears. "Daddy," mumbled Christopher, unable to find other words. It was too long since he had said that cherished word. And now he just couldn't keep quiet. The man stared at the child in confusion. He put his broad palm on his head and stroked his blonde hair. And then the unbelievable thing happened. The man's whole body trembled. His face lit up, his eyes opened, and his hands began to shake. "Christopher," he uttered in a hoarse voice. "My son, my dear Christopher." He cradled the boy in his arms, and Karen, not believing her eyes, covered her mouth with her hands, trying to stop the sobs. Bill looked up at his wife with tears in his eyes. "Karen," her husband muttered. She rushed to her nearest and dearest, hugging them both and thinking she would never let them go. Later, they sat at the table at Mrs. Stevenson's house. She made a soothing herbal tea. The old woman kept wailing that they'd flooded her bed with tears, that nothing would grow there now, though she wiped her tear-reddened eyes too. I was on my way home that night. I wanted to get home quickly to surprise you. There was a man standing on the road, trying to catch a ride. He looked like an ordinary guy, like everyone else, not suspicious at all. I decided to give him a ride because I could hardly keep my eyes open. I thought I would talk to him and it would be easier to drive. But when he got in the car, he pulled out his gun. It told me to get out. I got out, and he approached me from behind and hit me in the head. When I woke up, I didn't remember anything. He had hit me that hard. I didn't remember my name, my age, where I was going, or even where I was. I was in the woods. He must have dragged me away from the highway. I walked along the path through the woods until I came here, to the village. But I fainted before I reached the village. The locals found me and sheltered me. Bill recounted the fateful events that led him to this village. "So it wasn't you who died in the accident. We buried someone else," Karen guessed. In turn, Karen told him about the terrible car accident and the body that had been mistaken for her husband's. Karen was holding Bill's hand, and Christopher was hugging his father on the other side. Karen couldn't even unclench her fingers because she thought her husband would disappear. What if it was just a dream? But it wasn't. The year-long nightmare was over, and now the Howard family had a bright future ahead of them. "It's a good thing I bought a house in the countryside," Mindy said thoughtfully when everyone fell silent. "The fresh air really works great. It even brought Bill back to life." They smiled modestly at first, but then loud laughter filled the old red-roofed house.